My name is Mary Miss. I worked on the proposal and then the building of the South Cove at Battery Park City. And this was a site that was very familiar to me. I moved down to what is now called Tribeca in the late 60s and was really frustrated that I couldn't get to the edge of the water. In the early 70s, I used this exact site to do a project that was located on the sand that was the topping of the landfill that came from the excavation of the World Trade Center. When I was introduced to the project, I was introduced to my team members. I didn't have a voice in the selection of them, but it turned out to be a really interesting combination. It was the architect and urban designer Stan Eckstedt and the landscape architect Susan Child. Stan basically wanted to continue what was happening on the rest of the Esplanade. I was interested in having something very different in this area. And Susan was bringing a really vast knowledge of landscape and planting material to the discussion. It was an unusual situation. The selection committee was made up of people who really thought that artists could have a more essential role in the public realm. And that was something I'd been talking about through the 70s as I was involved with public art projects. And in this case, I got to be the lead designer of the team. It was a real collaboration. I think one of the most interesting things about this project is the movement through it. How being at this end, the south end, would be so different from being at the north end, the section where land was removed and you can see and hear water adjacent to an island, or the north end where the walkway's lower and you really hear the water slapping up underneath the wood. So the movement of the water, your own movement through the project, those are really important aspects of the site. You see the blue lights here. This really identifies the project from a distance. If I fly in, I can look down and see where the South Cove is. That's really kind of a surprise each time. The lighting designer, Howard Branston, came up with the idea of the blue lights, and it was such a wonderful aspect to the project. And Stan's wishing that there could be the continuation of the same lamps and benches that were on the rest of the Esplanade. But when I was first working on this project, it was almost impossible to get to the water's edge any place in New York City. And I really had this desire to give access to the water, to let people know that they were on an island, which would almost, you couldn't even tell that living in Manhattan. Connecting people to the natural world, letting people have an opportunity to smell and hear and see the water in a very intimate way was so important. So that's why I wanted this area to be very different than the rest of the Esplanade, where you're looking at the water almost at a distance. Here we cut the edge of the land down so that you could get closer to the water. And actually, I say we cut the edge of the land down, but it's not land, it's a platform. And one of the things that was really interesting to me in the very beginning was talking to the engineers who had built the original platform and figuring out how I could remove part of it, which is how we get water on the land side. One of the things that I felt so strongly about, I really wanted this to be a lush a rich place to be no matter what the season is. But I also had admired the connection between the land and the water that you see up the Hudson River in New York City, where old piers have been removed. The pylons are in the water. So we actually put these pylons in to kind of make that visual connection between the land and the water. Movement, walking has always been necessary to experience and see the projects that I've done over the years. Being able to move on the upper level of the South Cove or down close to the water or getting out on the walkway at the north end. You're given so many possible experiences, and it gives you time to experience something. It gives time for engagement with a place to happen. I feel like I'm the opposite of the land artists like Smithson and Heiser. I wanted places that people would inhabit and experience directly, not things that were being photographed from a helicopter. This was made possible by Battery Park City Authority, but it was also made possible by some wonderful people that I worked with. There was a stonemason who did a lot of the work in Battery Park City. And we went up the Hudson to tag stones that we would use. And they brought truckloads of stone. Well, this old mason and I did it in a week's time. And he taught me the hand signals for a crane. Susan Child's selection of multi-stemmed honey locust trees was just amazing. All I knew is that I had a placement of trees that they would reflect the beams underneath the platform, and I knew that I wanted it to be very lush, but I had no sense of the grasses. I could not have named the grasses and the trees that were used. I and others really felt strongly that artists could have an essential role in addressing the complex issues of our times. That has been a really difficult thing to communicate to people in power or cities or communities. I ended up starting a nonprofit called City is Living Laboratory with the idea that we could really put forward this role for artists as being essential and as important as the policymakers and the educators and the scientists. Artists have a way of engaging people in a visceral, emotional, physical way that the people who are talking about climate change might not be able to. And instead, as an artist, I'm really interested in how I can engage people and help them imagine a future of sustenance rather than a future of fear.
Visit Battery Park City in Lower Manhattan and see almost 24 examples of the art of our time, from installations and landworks to sculpture and memorials.